Hi everyone and welcome back to Story of the World Highlights. Today we'll be talking about Chapter 21. Chapter 21 takes us to Russia during World War I. Now, the situation in Russia was that there was a great wealth disparity between the peasants and the nobility. So this meant that the peasants, the majority of people in Russia, were living in impoverished, poor, terrible situations, while the minority, wealthy people, the royal family, nobles, heads of state, priests, they were living in much nicer conditions, living in lives of luxury. And this was the beginning of a building hatred towards the royal family. Now, the first thing that the Romanovs, the royal family at the time, did that upset the people was they had invited a strange monk to come and live with them. This monk's name was Rasputin, and he had supposed dark magical powers. And the people of Russia feared him and also hated him. He went about court drinking a lot, making a scene, partying all the time. People didn't understand why he was there, and they thought that he must have a spell on the Tsar in order to be there. Now, the Tsar actually had a good reason for Rasputin being there. You see, the Tsar's only son, Alexei, had a rare condition called hemophilia, which means that your blood doesn't clot. So a simple cut could mean you dying. He and his wife were under the impression or idea that Rasputin may be the only one able to help him. And so that's why he was there at court. But the people didn't know this. And so eventually, some of the nobles tried to kill him. But Rasputin just couldn't be killed. They tried to poison him. Didn't work. They tried to shoot him twice. It didn't work. So finally, they took him and dumped him in the river, where he drowned and did not come back up. So that was the end of Rasputin. Now, the next thing that the Romanovs did, specifically Nicholas II, that upset the people was that he joined World War I very quickly. The moment Serbia was in there, boom, so was Russia. And the people didn't like that. And the soldiers were not ready. They were able to gather up 6 million soldiers, but they only had 5 million weapons. So 1 million men were sent off into battle being told, don't worry, someone will die. Just grab their weapon. This was not something to win over the people with. Now, on top of that, the general in charge of everything was tactically terrible. And so Nicholas II's solution was to replace him with himself. So now Nicholas II, who knew even less about the military, was running the Russian military in World War I. The people were furious, and the soldiers were going in conditions that left little chance of survival. So this angered a lot of people in addition. Now they went to Nicholas II and the people, and they said, enough is enough. Down with the Tsar. We're done with this. They had had all they could handle. And so Nicholas II said, okay, I hear you. How about I give you a provincial government? And the people were somewhat tamed and okay with this. And they put a man named Alexander Kerensky at the top of this provincial government, which worked within St. Petersburg. Now, Nicholas II was hopeful that this would have been enough to help correct the issues and the hatred amongst the people in Russia. But it wasn't. It was too late. There was a man that was growing in popularity among the peasants named Vladimir Lenin. And Lenin was going around preaching about how enough is enough, our time is now. We should not be living with all the money and wealth to some and everyone else left to suffer. And so he said that the radical idea that wealth should be shared amongst the community and that everyone should have a chance to live a decent life. This really resonated with a lot of the peasants. And so he was growing a group of followers called the Bolsheviks. And eventually he had gotten them so riled up and excited that they took action. On October 24th, They stormed into St. Petersburg, Lenin and 25,000 people, and they went into the Winter Palace and destroyed the provincial government's buildings. Alexander Kerensky was able to escape just in time, but some others were not fortunate. Now, with the provincial government collapsed, Lenin and the Bolsheviks had taken over. Some of the first changes that Lenin did was he said Christianity has been a lie. It has been false. It is not provided for us. So they decided to remove any name of a city that was after a saint. So St. Petersburg, Leningrad. Now that that was taken care of, he decided that the Bolsheviks should be called the Communist Party and that they needed to be done with war, which the peasants were thrilled about. So he signed a treaty with Germany and left the war. Now that they had left the war, they had taken over, they needed to get rid of their number one threat, which was the Romanov family. You see, the Romanov family at this time was living under house arrest in a house a little bit to the east of Petrograd. And they had been living in house arrest for a while the government was figuring out what they wanted to do with them. Lenin knew that as long as they were alive, there would be a risk that supporters would try and put them back on the throne. So Lenin went and said they needed to be killed. So on July 17th, 1918, Lenin sent soldiers into the house in which the Romanovs stayed and woke them up and said that they were going to take a picture to let the people know that they were alive and well. The family got dressed. They went down into the basement to take the picture. But when they waited for the photographer, they were met by soldiers in the room who shot them all. Their bodies were taken into the woods and they were buried in unmarked graves. And that was the sad end of the Romanov family. But with that threat eliminated, Lenin could set about doing his revolutionary communist ideals and setting up his government. Some of the big things that the government started with was they made all land government property. They said that it wasn't fair that some people had a lot of land in excess while others didn't. So they took all land and they decided to divide it up equally among people. Then they went and took all businesses, schools, hospitals, you name it. And they also had those become government property. That way the government could control jobs, could control pay, control regulations more fairly. Now, all these rules that were happening were to give the government more power. And the government was just Lenin and a few of his friends. And so, were things really truly equal? We'll have to find out later. But that's all that we hear about with Russia in chapter 21. The rest of chapter 21 takes us back to the battlefront and the end of World War I. Now, we hear from Mr. Woodrow Wilson a quote that says that America will join the war so that the world may be made safe for democracy. A passionate philosophy that America still follows today, fighting for democracy in the world. Now, when the U.S. entered, the war had already been going on a long time. And the soldiers in Europe were tired and worn out and less in number than they started out. So having this new, fresh batch of troops coming in to help fight on the side of the Allies was really successful and was the key to the victory that they wanted. So on November 11th, 1918, Germany finally had to surrender. And the Allies won the war. Now, during the war, back at home in the places where the men had come from, their jobs were left, their roles in the families or society were left, and women had to come fill those gaps. And so women joined the men's workforce, and they excelled in those jobs and professions that otherwise they wouldn't have been allowed to do if it wasn't wartime. So when the war ended, it was very obvious that there was no argument for why women couldn't vote if they could do what the men did. So Great Britain released the Reform Act in 1918, allowing women to vote, and the U.S. added the 19th Amendment in 1920. That's it for Chapter 21. I'll see you next time for Story of the World Highlights. Bye-bye.